Yeah, I feel like I shouldn't show bias here, but I will say that this is my first webinar of the year that we're doing together, and it's the one that I'm personally really excited about. For whatever reason, the G2 network has just been we kind of shared worlds. Last year, did some fun
Hmm.
collab with Miles. It's just in a small world
Yeah,
of RevOps.
for sure. Miles and I actually partnered really closely together while we were at G2. So I want to say he was an inspiration when I saw his webinar a couple months ago.
Oh, amazing! Yeah,
Yeah.
Miles is great. Mitch is obviously amazing. So, no, it's fun to collab. And so, yeah. Well, why don't we do this, Syed? I think we can go ahead and get things started. Like I said, I'm sure folks are going to continue to trickle in here. But again, super excited to have you on here, leading the first webinar in the series for this year for us. So, Syed, we've got a lot to cover in not that much time, and so I'll kind of give you the floor here. It'd be helpful maybe give us a quick intro on kind of your background here, and then floor is yours. Like, let's dive into GTM Analytics.
Yeah, for sure. Hey everyone, I'm Syed Rahman. I'm a director of go-to-market analytics and operations at Sixth Sense currently. I want to say I've been in this space for like 5 to 6 years. Started off my career in finance, but slowly kind of matriculated my way to understanding big data, working with leaders to understand different metrics and insights, and how do you automate that and really drive interesting insights. So I'm excited to talk to you guys today about a topic I'm passionate about, which is driving revenue and operational excellence from a go-to-market analytics standpoint. Before that, I want to do a quick icebreaker in the chat, a literal icebreaker, because this is very top of mind for me. Comment in the chat if you're in a location that is currently above or below freezing temperature, which is 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. Cool. This is top of mind for me because tomorrow we are experiencing negative 32-degree wind chill here in Chicago. So I'm not looking forward to it, but it's just relevant for me. So a little icebreaker there. For the agenda today, we'll talk about four different things. What is go-to-market analytics first and why it matters? The name go-to-market analytics, I've heard it called revenue analytics, a couple different names, but why does it matter now and what is it? What does a mature go-to-market analytics function look like? How do we partner with traditional operations teams? So we have this kind of legacy revenue operations, go-to-market operations teams. How does the analytics team fit in there? And how do we help leadership see around corners? So first, I won't read off the slide necessarily, but I have five kind of pillars of what I think a good go-to-market analytics team looks like. First, we're responsible for comprehensive data collection. You kind of see in a couple of slides here that there's so many different touch points along the customer journey, from marketing, sales, customer success and advocacy, and then how does the customer interact with our product? Analytics teams in partnership with a bunch of other different teams and organizations have the opportunity to bring all that data all together and create one holistic view of that customer journey and all the touch points along the way. Once we have the data, like what do we do with it, right? There's a ton of different tools out there, a ton of different data. How do we work cross-functionally with all those functions that I just mentioned to drive metric ownership, business logic, to then inherently perform analytics, understand trends in the business, how those trends vary between segments and strategies and things like that. This one's top of mind for me because I'm heavily involved in it right now. How are we involved in the go-to-market strategy and planning cycle? How do we think about segmentation? How do we think about our customer base currently and what characteristics they have, behaviors, and preferences to help us drive targeted marketing and sales efforts? There's hundreds of thousands of accounts out there. How do we use data that we have through our comprehensive data collection to drive the outcomes we want as a business? And then along the way, like once we have the data, once we have the metrics defined, how are we performing strategic modeling to help determining if our go-to-market strategy will drive the outcomes we want? And this last one, I would say, is the most important to me. Is like once we have all of those four main other pillars, how are we helping the rest of the business see around corners and using predictive analytics? where like we can tell you a quarter from now where our booking is going to be because we have a good understanding of our pipeline or our retention modeling and things like that. So those are kind of the five main pillars I would say from a good go-to-market analytics function looks like. Why does it matter now? There's so many different channel segment strategies. The whole, I would say, Series A to E landscape has changed so much in the last 5 years, and most companies are struggling to navigate all this effectively. As like all of our data and digital landscape continues to evolve, we can be the stewards with help from our data engineers, corporate data functions, things like that. We can be the stewards of all different touch points and metrics that help bring in data and insights from all the sales, marketing, customer experience, and product teams in one place. And I kind of touched upon the customer journey, and this is a sample one. You probably see something similar like this if you're in a revenue operations space, but there's so many touch points along the customer journey. If you're a part of a go-to-market analytics function, or even just a function that captures data, you likely have data around each one of these touch points and more. And that's what makes your function, your role in this landscape so important because you're closest to this data and you can help tell that story. So what does a good or mature go-to-market analytics function look like? Kind of touched upon some of these already, but there's clear metric hierarchy. We're working with leaders to define North Star metrics, drive inputs and KPIs across segments. Speaking of segments, we understand the different nuances between our different customers. So let's say you're a company that has 100 customers. Not all 100 customers are going to look and act the same way, but you understand what characteristics that drive different customer segments, and you can provide specific benchmarks to track performance there. So, for example, a common segment is enterprise customers versus small business, right? So you understand like what our win rates are with enterprise customers versus a small business, their renewal rates, their pipeline conversion, etc. And you're able to share that back with leadership in a cohesive way that makes sense. We talked about data collection. With data collection, there's strong data governance needed. And this can't all be solely on the go-to-market analytics function, but they can be driving it, right? So making sure they're working cross-functionally throughout the organization to make sure we have consistent definitions and lineage for trusted, actionable insights. We're embedded in forecasting and planning. Analytics integrated into RevOps workflows and forecasting. We're involved in the planning cycle. We're involved in forecasting. If there's scenarios where we're shifting go-to-market strategy, we're using our comprehensive data to help drive that outcome. And then lastly, I think this is where the biggest opportunity area is for analytics functions, is we're trusted partners to revenue teams and RevOps. So how are we collaborating closely with the leaders and operations teams to drive the business outcomes that we want? And then how are we applying those insights, right? So we have the data-driven decision making. How do we use that to then identify different optimization opportunities? So if we see trends in the business that don't make sense or don't align to the strategy that we're going out for, how can we course correct really quickly? How can we then work with our partners to forecast and scenario plan? And then how do we align our teams and strategies to correct and then measure that progress? Because we start off with the strategy at the beginning of the year. Likely, there's areas of opportunity within that strategy that we'll learn through across the year. We have to be nimble enough to provide the insights back to leadership where we can quickly course correct, change behaviors, and then realign on where we want to go ahead.
So, really quick, one question that comes up, I think, a lot around this is actually like, which of the opportunities do we prioritize first? Anyone that's in a startup knows that there's, a ton of different areas that could be optimized. Like, how does
Yeah.
the GTM analytics function kind of play a part in deciding which one should we go after kind of today versus tomorrow versus maybe never?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's where like I like to think of prioritization matrices. So one of the things that we have here at Sixth Sense and in my that I've used in past lives as well is the value of effort and the value of importance, right? So how do we if something is really complex to execute and is low importance, you should probably not prioritize that opportunity, right? But if something is high value and medium level of effort, you should go after it. And these are things that you should align with your cross-functional leaders and partners. So, for example, I'm in lockstep with our sales operations team to say, like, hey, we have a pipeline issue and we need to go course correct X, Y, and Z. What's the reasonability of like what we want to do to drive those outcomes? And making sure that we're all swimming in the same direction and having that conversation up front versus like having it after a certain metric or insight becomes a problem, being able to see that through leading indicators and seeing around corners.
It's super helpful. It's one of those things I wish I had adopted much earlier in my ops career. The idea of how much effort is going into it and the impact. So super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Great question. So I kind of talked about what does good go-to-market analytics teams look like. What about some of the pitfalls? And these are things I've experienced and I've learned throughout my kind of career here so far. And like, not to say that I'm still learning, right? So I'd love to hear from you guys as well as we get connected more and more on like what are the things that are not showing up on this list. But to me, there's too many dashboards and not enough decisions. We sometimes fall into the trap of like, all right, let's spin up a dashboard to track X, Y, and Z, or let's spin up a dashboard to drive this behavior and outcome. But I don't know, 2 weeks after we spin out that dashboard, there's no usage, right? So what are the things that we are actually trying to drive behaviors on, and how do we make sure like everyone in the organization is enabled on that, and how are we making sure everyone's held accountable? I'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about partnerships with traditional ops teams. The other one I would say is no clear metric ownership. If there's five different definitions of win rate, there's no definition of win rate, right? We need to be able to align on a singular definition, and there's going to be nuances and things like that along the way. But we need to be able to align on a singular definition that the company is driving towards for especially our key core metrics, right? ARR, bookings, retention rates, pipeline conversion, win rates, et cetera. But we need to be able to be the stewards of that logic and that metric ownership, working cross-functionally with our sales, marketing, customer success, product, and finance partners. This one I think is honestly some of the feedback I've gotten early on in my career. We're too behind the scenes. We're the ones who are kind of closest to the data, and we have a comprehensive view of the data, right? And the prospect to customer journey. Make your voice heard. How are we looking at different trends in the data? How are we working with our leaders, bubbling up issues that we see as opportunity areas, using kind of some of that prioritization that Josh asked about in the previous slide? How are we making our voice heard because we are the closest to the data and being owners of that? Like typically leaders are looking for someone to help drive their decision making and verify some of their hunches, right? And we can honestly do that with data. And we can bring up items that are not on their radar, right? Like maybe there's an issue that in retention along the customer journey that we find out there's low adoption in a certain area. How are we using our data to bubble that up? I will also say typical analytics team pitfall is reacting instead of leading. And I want to bring up a key point here is that perfection is the enemy of progress. I feel like analytics teams in the past have always fallen into the trap of, okay, I need to make sure this data is like 100% right before sharing it out. But along the way, if you're wasting too much time on that perfection, you probably miss the opportunity to drive the behavior you want to change. So this is a key point because like I always like to use like the 80/20 rule or the 90/10 rule, what have you. If we feel like our data is, I don't know, 90% clean, and then there's a 10% outlier, let's just go with it because it's probably going to tell you the same story that we want to tell anyways. And the last thing, kind of related to the previous one, but we have insights with a clear call to action. We're presenting trends in the data and just like, hey, you go ahead and digest it, leader, or you go ahead and digest it, FLM, on your patch of reps, right? But a good analytics professional will look at the data, synthesize it, create an action item for that person you're sharing this insight with, and open up meaningful dialogue along the way.
And we started to get some questions rolling in on pitfalls. Maybe unsurprisingly, this
Yeah.
was one of my favorite ones. So the questions it's common for execs to just keep asking for more data, more reports, more dashboards, and never use them. Like,
Yeah.
how do you manage that conversation and request so you and your team aren't just wasting time for these
Yeah,
folks?
that's a great question because like I still fall into that trap today, right? Like, hey, we're often moving at such a fast pace, like you don't understand 100% the context of what they're asking, and you're just like, all right, you just trust them, right? But I would say as stewards of the data and like and making sure you're the closest ones to the data, go out, spend 5 to 10 minutes, try to understand what the context was behind the question. Because oftentimes, like something that could be solved in a dashboard could be solved in a slide or like an email or a quick Slack message, right? And but that's where like being in lockstep with your operations team and your strategy and your go-to-market strategy is so important because you can understand like, hey, I know X, Y, Charles is asking for X, Y, and Z, but hey, he doesn't really understand the data too much. I have a better lens to this, and here's what I would share instead. And it's tough early on in your career to have those conversations, but understanding the context of the question and what the outcome they're trying to drive is often just as important as the output you're producing.
Super helpful. Yeah, I think getting to the why behind the ask is like one of the most critical pieces, but it's so easy. And I used to do this all the time, and I still do this today, where I'll just spin up the dashboard right away, and then it ends up, to your point earlier, in this graveyard of dashboards that no one's looking at. And I think trust just starts to deteriorate then. So super helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ed.
And the other thing I would say is like every go-to-market analytics function should have some sort of a roadmap and being very transparent with that roadmap, right? So like if you have a comprehensive dashboard strategy already, likely some of the requests that are coming in are already captured there. So that's where I would be like spend some time, work with yourself, your leaders, your team, wherever you are in your careers to make sure like, hey, we have a roadmap of dashboards of products that we want to put out there. And this is what it'll cover, and this is what it might not cover. And that's where you can have more of a trade-off conversation with leaders, with people who are making these requests. I'm like, hey, if you give us a little bit more time, here's what we'll produce that's a little bit more comprehensive and more that'll drive more engagement and enablement down the line.
I love
Great
it.
question. Great question, though. Wanted to get into a slightly different topic, but very related. So, and this is how do analytics teams and traditional ops teams work together, right? I almost think like there's a strong overlap in the capabilities of each team, but they're kind of different roles, all right? What, look, I don't know. Let's say the operations teams are more of the quarterbacks, and the analytics teams are more of the offensive line. If you're following football recently, but I would say different roles and but there's a strong overlap, right? So how do we kind of divide and conquer? And so what come showing here is that like analytics teams are can provide insights, modeling, measurement, prioritization, work with partnership to then drive process, systems, enablement, comp plans, outcomes, and then a good relationship has a kind of this circular, almost like circular thing aspect where you're partnering and you're in lockstep with those functions along the way. And so what I kind of depict here is that we clear ownership accelerates execution. So analytics teams own definition, own the data collection, own modeling and insights. And then we're working back with the RevOps teams to taking those insights and hey, maybe we need a process improvement or an SLA improvement. Maybe we need another field to capture data in Salesforce or what have you. I know data integrity is tough there when you're adding in tons of different fields, but you can't catch my drift there. Like taking the definitions and the insights and passing it, working closely with your sales operations, CS operations, marketing operations functions to help drive process improvements, SLA improvements, tooling, and enablement to thus drive field execution, which is the most important part of this is if we're putting out a bunch of data out there and insights that is falling flat, we're not going to get the field execution. So making sure first your RevOps, sales ops partner, CS ops partner understands the data that you're putting out there, and they're able to take that data and work out with the field with the leaders to drive that accountability and the execution that's needed. The last thing I'll touch upon is how do we get more front facing in the exec and boardroom? And so throughout my career, this has been like a evolving journey for me. Like I've been owning board decks, for example, really telling the narrative around there. But I would say that to make sure you have trust in your ELT conversations and your executive level conversations, they're really trying to understand like, hey, how do you help them see around corners? So confidence in the forecast, using our data points to provide another lens on like what we think a bookings forecast could be, what do we think a pipeline forecast could be, or which customers are going to churn and which customers are going to retain, using data along those points to help drive that. Because there's always going to be a field level of like, hey, they're the closest to the customers, they're the closest to the prospects, but we can use data along the way to say like, hey. Typically, I don't know, we've had 10 different meetings with a prospect before we are in a place where we're going to close the business. How do we use that to drive a forecast for bookings, for example? So just helping the leadership and the board rooms help see around corners. And then like we kind of touched upon this earlier, but clear trade-offs, right? We're not going to be able to solve everything all at once. And so making sure you're having that conversation to explicitly kind of show like the drivers on what you're working on and how that is going to show up in the results. So like to me right now, one of my biggest focus areas is always going to be like, do we have a good sense of where we're going to end our bookings numbers and our churn numbers at any given period of time and pipeline? And I should be able to spit that off to anyone who asks at any given point in time. And I have like a running model. I have people on my team that help facilitate that. But that's one of the things that is important to me. And there's other things that they'll come along with in your way that you kind of need to navigate to make sure you're focusing on the right things at the right time. And being able to have those conversations with leaders is really important on like what are those trade-offs. If I'm going to work on X, A, B, and C, I need to give up X, Y, and Z right now. It's something I can prioritize later. And then more so than like, so I would say like we've been in a challenging startup environment in the last 3 to 5 years, depending on the type of business you're in. I've always heard from leaders like the results are going to be the results, but I don't want to be surprised. And so, how do you enable your data, your operating rhythm to make sure that your leaders are not surprised? So, there's I can even talk about a scenario. This is pretty vulnerable and transparent here, but a scenario where I was very involved in the forecasting process. A month before the quarter ended, our bookings number was like, I don't know, 20, 30% off. And it came as a surprise to me and it came as a surprise to my leaders. And I had to raise my hand and say, like, hey, that's my fault, my team's fault, our team's fault because we didn't capture the data points that we needed along the way. So how do you take that as a learning opportunity, continue to refine all the data points you need to drive the right outcomes? Because I think more so than like tough results is execs hate being surprised. And so I kind of left that quote down below is that our job isn't to be right, it's to be directionally useful and early. So how do you like it's week 2 in the quarter. how are you looking at your pipeline right now and are able to identify bookings down the line and making sure like we have a 10% confidence interval on where we're going to end the quarter on. And that kind of delves into leading versus lagging indicators. And so this is a mindset shift on like reporting the news and being proactive. So I'll give you one example. So if you kind of work backwards from here, down below you see like the bookings, ARR, and win rate. To me, those are our lagging indicators of the health of a business of our business, right? Prior to that, are we getting the activity we need with our certain segments or with our certain customers and prospects? Is there early stage conversion? Are all reps on our sales teams participating in building out pipeline, having meetings and conversations? We have account scoring models. Are we focused in on the right customers and the right fit of customers? And what is like the eligibility and white space of those things? These are all items that happen that feed into bookings and ARR and win rates and current ACV and current customers. But being able to capture these data points along the way is really important to make sure you have leading indicators so you can help everyone see around corners and then you create less surprises. That's pretty much it, Josh. Was there any other questions that you had or in the chat from the group?
Yeah, I think we'll have time for maybe one more, but first, Syed, thank you so much for going through this. I think this is such an important topic area. One of the questions was, a lot of teams out there don't have GTM Analytics as a standalone function yet.
Yeah.
How do you think about, being in that's in RevOps shoes or, at a company that doesn't have it? Like, how do you get your boss, how do you get your executive team on board that this should be prioritized?
Yeah, I would say it all depends on the stage of the company you're in. Like I don't know. I started at a company where I was a go-to-market analytics team of one, right? So you're really just working on everything, but I think just understanding and emphasizing the value of like the data collection piece and the metric ownership and where that drives value in the organization is really important. And so like operations teams are spread so thin nowadays that they can't be stewards of definition and data governance and things like that. And they can't work with the field on enablement and build out modeling and all at the same time. So it's really important to have some, even if it's not a dedicated function, but a dedicated maybe person that has I don't know, 50% capacity in their schedule to work on data collection and it's working on how they would go about learning about consolidating data in all in one place in an EDW like Snowflake or Databricks, for example.
Amazing. Well, Zai, I think that brings us to time. Thank you so much again for going through this. This has been a much requested topic for folks, so can't thank you enough. Thank you everyone for joining. As usual with these, we'll be sharing the recording coming out after this. If you want to get connected to Syed, he is active on LinkedIn. I'd encourage you to reach out if you have more questions on the GTM Analytics side. Reach out to me if you need help standing it up inside of your company as well. But again, thank you everybody for joining, and we'll chat soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
All right, thanks again.